It happened on an ordinary school day during my sophomore year. Lunch had just ended, and students were settling into their afternoon classes when the PA system crackled to life. The announcement was unexpected lockdown procedures were being implemented immediately. The tone of the voice wasn't normal. There was an urgency that made everyone uneasy. At first, students exchanged nervous glances, unsure if it was a drill. But the way the teacher reacted, how quickly she locked the door, how her hands trembled as she pulled the blinds, told us this was real. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like an eternity. Then came the sound from the hallway. Slow, uneven footsteps, almost like someone was dragging something along the floor. The noise stopped just outside our classroom door. A faint knocking followed, soft at first, then more frantic. A muffled voice pleaded from the other side, but something about it didn't sound right. The tone was desperate, but there was something unsettling in the way the words were spoken. The teacher, pale and visibly shaken, stepped toward the door, peering through the small window. Whatever she saw on the other side made her stiffen. A heavy silence fell over the room. The knocking had stopped, but the feeling of something or someone lingering just beyond the door remained. The next announcement confirmed what we feared. This was not a drill. The lockdown persisted for hours, police swarming the building. Later, we learned that an intruder had entered the school, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. But the real mystery was the voice we had heard outside our classroom. It didn't belong to the intruder. It was later identified as a teacher who had gone missing during the incident. The details surrounding her disappearance were never fully explained. All we knew was that she had been found later, severely injured, locked inside a supply closet. The school never talked about what really happened that day, but I still remember the sound of her voice, pleading from the other side of that door. Before we dive into the next story, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling tale. Your support keeps these stories coming, so share with friends and family. Now, let's get back to the horror. I want to share something that happened to me back in high school. It was a normal day. I was a junior at a small public school in a quiet town where nothing ever really happened. But then came the lockdown. It wasn't unusual for schools to do lockdown drills, so at first, none of us thought much of it. It was just another drill, right? The PA system buzzed to life and the voice was calm. Yet there was an urgency to it that made everyone pause. Attention students and staff. Lockdown procedure in effect. Lock your doors, turn off your lights, and stay away from the windows. I repeat, lockdown in effect. This is not a drill. The voice didn't sound like it normally did during drills. It wasn't the usual tone. This one sounded nervous. At first, I didn't panic. I figured it was just a drill that maybe went wrong. But I started looking around at my classmates and realized something was different. People weren't laughing or joking around like they usually do during drills. They were anxious. The teacher, Mr. Williams, didn't say anything for a few moments, just locking the door and pulling the blinds down. But his eyes told me something was wrong. He finally told us to get down low and stay quiet. I could hear the faint sound of running feet in the hallway outside. Then I heard shouting loud and frantic. I couldn't make out the words, but the fear in the voices was enough to make my heart race. Something wasn't right. We huddled under the desks, trying to keep quiet, but the sounds outside only grew more intense. Then we heard it. A single loud bang against the door. At first, I thought it was a student trying to get in. Maybe one of the ones who hadn't heard the announcement, but then came the voice. "Let me in. I'm not here to hurt anyone." The voice was shaking. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. It was just desperate. Mr. Williams walked over to the door, peering through the small window, his face going white. "Stay back, everyone," Stay low." The banging continued, and the voice started crying out. But then I heard something that froze my blood. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps coming from the other side of the door. But they didn't sound like someone running away or even trying to escape. They sounded deliberate. Then, everything went silent. The door stopped shaking. The voices stopped. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. No one dared to move, to speak. About 20 minutes later, the PA crackled, back to life. "Everyone, stay in your classrooms. The situation is under control. No one is to leave until further notice. Police are on the way." The lockdown lasted for hours. When we were finally allowed to leave, the police were everywhere. There were reports of a potential intruder on the grounds, but when the police searched, they found no one. No sign of who or what had been outside that door. There were no cameras that could have caught what happened during that time. It wasn't until later that we found out about the true horror of the day. Apparently, a student one who had been suspended earlier in the week had snuck back onto campus that morning, armed. He had been trying to get into the school, but was seen by a teacher just before the lockdown started. The police said he managed to hide somewhere in the building, but after hours of searching, they found no trace of him. But the thing that still chills me to this day, the voice that begged to be let in, the voice that cried, "I'm not here to hurt anyone." That voice wasn't the intruders. It was the voice of a teacher who went missing that day. The police later confirmed that the teacher had been found dead, but the whole thing remained a mystery. They said she had been locked in a room with the intruder. Her voice? It was recorded during the chaos. We were never told exactly what happened to her. To this day, I don't know if I'll ever feel safe in a school again. Whatever that voice was, whatever happened that day, I'll never forget. During my senior year, I stayed late at school for track practice. By the time practice ended, the halls were nearly empty. The only people left were a few athletes and the janitor making his rounds. I went into the locker room with a few teammates to grab my stuff. It was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. As I was packing up, I noticed the back door to the locker room was slightly open. I was sure no one had gone through it, yet there it was open just enough to let in a draft. As I walked toward it, a faint shuffling noise came from the far corner of the room. I turned, expecting to see one of my teammates, but the corner was empty. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I was imagining things, but the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. That's when I saw it a shadow, darker than the dimly lit room, standing near the lockers. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I focused on it, I realized it wasn't a reflection or an illusion. It was something real, something watching me. The shape didn't look fully human. It was tall, but distorted, as if it wasn't bound by the normal rules of movement. It shifted slightly, and for a moment, it felt like it was staring straight into me. A wave of cold washed over me, and the air grew thick. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The door to the locker room slammed shut behind me, snapping me out of my daze. I grabbed my bag and left as fast as I could. My teammates gave me confused looks, but I couldn't explain what I had just seen. I never went into that locker room alone again. Others had mentioned strange feelings in that space before, but no one wanted to talk about it. Whatever I saw that night, I know it wasn't just my imagination. It was during my junior year when our school went into an unexpected lockdown. The announcement was abrupt, the principal's voice shaking slightly as she ordered all students to take cover. At first, everyone assumed it was a drill, but when the teachers locked the doors with an urgency we had never seen before, we knew something was wrong. The lights were turned off. The room fell into a heavy silence, except for the sound of shallow breathing and the occasional rustle of someone shifting in place. Minutes passed, then nearly an hour. Then, from the hallway, footsteps. They weren't rushed like a security officer checking rooms. They were slow, deliberate, almost hesitant. The sound grew louder, stopping just outside our classroom door. A shadow passed over the small window, and the handle jiggled lightly. Everyone held their breath. The handle twisted again, this time harder, like someone was testing it. Then, the sound of knuckles softly rapping against the wood. Just once. A long silence followed. Then, suddenly, a loud bang against the door. Someone or something had slammed into it with force. The teacher held up a trembling hand, signaling everyone to stay completely still. No one moved. After what felt like hours, the sound of retreating footsteps echoed down the hallway. We thought it was over. But then, from the other side of the room, the closet door creaked. Something was inside. The lockdown lasted another hour before we were finally evacuated. The police never confirmed what had happened, only that an unknown individual had been inside the school and was never found. What scared me the most, though, was knowing that the footsteps outside our classroom weren't the only ones in that room with us. It was supposed to be a normal day. Halfway through my second period class, the principal's voice came over the intercom. The words, "urgent lockdown," effective immediately. The teacher acted fast, locking the doors and switching off the lights. Students shuffled to the floor, hiding behind desks. For the first few minutes, it was just silence. Then, from somewhere outside, the faint sound of sirens. And then came the tapping. The classroom had a row of windows along one wall, covered with thin blinds. The tapping started soft, like a single fingertip brushing against the glass. At first, no one reacted, thinking it was the wind or a branch. But then, it grew louder, more insistent. The teacher crept toward the windows and carefully peeked through a small gap in the blinds. She froze. Something was staring back. A pale face pressed up against the glass. The features were blurred by the thin plastic slats, but the eyes were locked onto hers, wide, unblinking, not a single emotion behind them. Then, slowly, the face moved. It slid from one window to the next, then the next. The tapping followed, keeping in time with the movement. It was as if whoever or whatever it was checking each window, one by one. The air in the classroom grew thick with fear. The tapping reached the last window, and then it stopped. No one dared to move. The sirens outside had faded. The hallway was dead silent. Then, after a long pause, the sound of the doorknob rattling sent a jolt of fear through everyone. It twisted once, then again, then silence. Hours passed before the lockdown was lifted. The school never gave us a clear answer about what had happened. But the next morning, we noticed something strange. The outside of our classroom windows, where the face had been, was on the second floor. Whoever had been tapping on the glass shouldn't have been able to reach that high.